Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at something pretty fascinating, though, yeah, admittedly quite sensitive. It's the world of men who pay for sex.
And our way into this is through a really unique source, isn't it? It's a collection of what they called field
Yeah,
reports.
exactly. From a UK website, punternet.com,
Yeah.
which was active right around 1999, 2000, so turn of the millennium stuff.
And it's probably important we say up front, we're looking at this through a sort of academic sociological lens.
hmm
The goal isn't judging, it's trying to understand the perspectives, the experiences shared within that specific online community back then.
Exactly. And what makes this so, well, compelling, I think, is the method. We're not relying just on interviews with sex workers or, potentially skewed samples.
No, this is the men's own words. It's a huge data set. Oh, was it over 5,000 reviews?
Yeah, 5,000 reviews by over 2,500 different men talking about encounters with more than 2,600 women. It's just a massive amount of firsthand material.
Which gives you this incredibly rare window, really. We can look at the language they used, their expectations around like intimacy, pleasure.
Even how they thought about value risk, within that whole commercial setup.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite revealing.
So yeah, prepare yourself. This is going to be quite a deep dive into a world that's, well, often kept pretty hidden. Okay, let's start unpacking it. First theme, bodies for hire.
Right. And what just jumps out at you immediately from this Punternet material is the very clear commodification. The objectification of women's bodies is just so explicit.
It really is. You see it right away in how sex workers were advertised online. Sometimes through agencies, right? They tended to have a more maybe corporate feel representing
Right.
several women.
Or you had independent escorts, and their approach could vary a lot more.
And the pricing tells the story too. Often hourly rates, but sometimes like broken down for a specific sex act.
Yeah, and the ads would often spell out exactly what was on offer, what was acceptable, and crucially, what was prohibited.
Our source gives examples, doesn't like oh and kissing. Oral without orgasm and kissing might be offered.
But then things like CIM or A, come in mouth or anal sex, might be explicitly listed as not available. It shows the boundaries being drawn.
Precisely. And then you get into the reviews themselves, and the whole concept of the male gaze is just, well, it's everywhere.
Absolutely. The level of detail in describing and evaluating women's bodies is quite striking. The focus is overwhelmingly physical.
And a really interesting aspect of that evaluation that comes through is this huge emphasis on authenticity.
Mm. There's a very strong expectation that the woman in person should match her online pictures or description.
Right. And when they don't, you really hear the disappointment in the reviews.
Oh, yeah. Discrepancies in age, body type, hair color, even.
Yeah, I remember one reviewer entranced. He noted a woman had discolored teeth, but then he kind of added, but then so do I, which sort of underlines that constant comparison.
It does. Comparison against an ideal. And the ideal that keeps cropping up in these accounts is very much the fit, toned, tanned body that gets praised explicitly a lot.
And then the contrast is really stark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Descriptions of what they call maternal bodies.
Yeah, using terms like sag or
Yeah,
wrinkled,
right.
clearly positioning it as, undesirable compared to that fit ideal.
It's quite jarring. And the reviews also categorize women, don't they? Like exotic types versus the girl next door.
Yes, and ethnicity or nationality sometimes gets mentioned, especially if the woman wasn't seen as white or British.
Hmm.
And, you see the use of that outdated term colored sometimes, which is obviously problematic.
And what about older women? How are they described?
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes they could still fit the sort of acceptable attractiveness mold if they had certain features.
Okay.
And if a man said he preferred older women, the justification was often about them having supposedly more experience or better technique.
It all seems to plug right back into those wider societal ideas about what makes women attractive and, I guess, available, doesn't it?
Exactly. These Punternet representations, they're reflecting those ideals, but also within this specific context, reinforcing them.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Our next theme is about the commodification of intimacy, performing erotic labor.
Right. So this moves beyond just the physical. It's about the idea that commercial sex involves more than just a transaction. It involves what sociologists call erotic labor.
Which includes performing intimacy, managing emotions, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And the source material actually makes a useful distinction between emotion work, which is managing your own feelings, and emotional labor.
Right, where managing feelings is part of the job itself, like a flight attendant being cheerful.
Exactly. And that leaves you to the central question. In paid sex, is intimacy a genuine service being sold, Or is it purely a performance?
The idea of counterfeit intimacy.
Exactly. And you see hints of this in how the men describe the setting. They might mention, clean rooms, maybe candles, soft music.
Romantic props
Eh,
almost, drinks, maybe small gifts.
yeah. And those things could be doing different jobs, couldn't they? Helping the client relax, setting a mood, or maybe just bridging that awkward gap between paying the money and, the sex itself.
And the reviews show really different attitudes towards intimacy, don't they?
Definitely. Some men seem to want to avoid it entirely. They prefer it purely transactional, almost detached.
But then others really value what gets called the girlfriend experience.
Yes. And they use language you'd normally associate with romance, talking about cuddling or feeling like a lover, explicitly not just a client or a punter.
Yeah, we've got actual quotes here. One reviewer, Slappy, wrote something like, "She really made it feel as if we were newfound lovers, as opposed to an escort experience."
And another, leg man, just said she makes you feel like a lover, not a punter. It really shows that desire for something more than just the physical act.
And kissing seems really significant in that.
Hugely significant. It's often seen as a marker of genuine intimacy. If kissing is included, it seems to elevate the whole experience, its perceived value.
And some sex workers might use it selectively, like offer it as a premium thing.
Perhaps. And we even see complaints when it's promised but doesn't happen, like that reviewer Reuters you mentioned.
It's fascinating how things like passion, love, even spontaneity
Yeah.
get talked about in this context. It
Mm.
feels like some men are trying to sort of blur the lines.
Yeah, blur the lines between what is fundamentally a commercial deal and what they maybe want to feel is a more quote-unquote genuine interaction.
Could that tie into what the source calls normalizing deviancy, making it feel less like just paying for sex?
I think that's a strong possibility. By wrapping it in the language of romance or intimacy, maybe they're rationalizing it to themselves, making it feel more like a connection, even a very temporary one.
And what about that idea of treating her right? How does that fit in?
Well, it's presented often as just basic respect, which is important, of course.
Yeah.
But it also seems to function sometimes as a kind of tactic, treat her well, and maybe you'll get a better, more engaged, more intimate performance in return.
So ultimately, even though they know it's a transaction?
It seems many still want to believe in the authenticity of the intimacy shown.
Yeah.
It probably fulfills some kind of psychological need, feeling desired, connected, even in that commercial setting.
Okay, let's change tack again. Next up, sexual pleasure and erotic performance.
Right, so now we're focusing more squarely on the physical side of things because it's crucial to remember not everyone paying for sex is primarily looking for that emotional connection or intimacy.
Absolutely. For a lot of these men, it seems their own physical pleasure, their sexual satisfaction, that's the main event, and the reviews make that crystal clear.
Overwhelmingly so. What was the figure? Over 90% of the reviews on Punternet reported positive sexual satisfaction.
Yeah, it's very high.
And you definitely see a kind of performative aspect to male sexuality coming through in these writings.
How so?
Well, the men often spend quite a bit of time in their reviews describing their penis and how it performed during the encounter.
Ah, right. Using euphemisms, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. Lots of euphemisms. You see things like John Thomas, or even I think trouser snake was mentioned. The penis gets personified, almost given it its own agency, its own will.
And that probably connects to wider social pressures on men about sexual performance, doesn't it?
For sure. The need to get an erection, keep it, ejaculate. These are often seen, maybe subconsciously, as key signs of masculinity, of virility.
You even see guys explaining away erection problems, right? Saying it was just nerves or because they were new to being a punter.
Yeah, almost deflecting from any sense of personal failing, perhaps.
Interestingly, though, the idea of men giving women pleasure also comes up.
It does. There seems to be this underlying expectation of, well, reciprocity. Even though it's a paid encounter, there's still a sense that the woman should ideally enjoy it too, or at least seem to.
Which brings us to female orgasm in sex work. How did the reviews talk about that?
Well, the source suggests there's definitely an awareness of the possibility of faking what it calls maybe a con game.
Mm-hmm.
But even if the men suspect it might be faked, believing the orgasm is real can still work to kind of validate their own performance, their potency.
Right. It reinforces that masculine identity again.
Exactly. It sets up this complex situation where maybe both parties have an interest in presenting the experience as mutually satisfying, regardless of the reality underneath.
Okay. Let's move into the nuts and bolts now with doing the business.
Yeah.
This seems to be about the practical side.
Yeah, this section really digs into the commercial foundations, and a key question it raises is about power dynamics. Who's really in control here? The sex worker providing the service or the client paying the money?
And the language itself shouts commercial, doesn't it? All those terms used on the site and in the reviews.
Completely.
Yeah.
Clients, punters, vendors, consumers. It frames the whole thing very clearly as a transaction, buying and selling.
And central to that transaction for the men is this idea of value for money, VFM.
Yes, VFM comes up constantly. It seems to be a major factor driving their choices who to see, whether to go back.
But it's not just about the price tag, is it? It's broader than that.
Much broader. It seems to wrap up a whole load of things. The perceived quality of the sex, the quantity, sure, the price, but also things like the sex worker's emotional input, how engaged she seemed, even how convenient the location was.
You see guys evaluating it all the time, like that reviewer Singh, regretting he missed a supposedly better deal he read about later.
Yeah, or the opposite, someone having a surprisingly good experience at a cheaper place, exceeding their low expectations and rating the VFM highly.
And interestingly, the desire just to talk, to get to know the woman a bit, that also seems to feed into their sense of satisfaction in VFM.
It does. It suggests it wasn't always just about the sex act itself. That interaction mattered.
And time is obviously a huge structuring element here.
Absolutely crucial. Clock time governs everything. You see phrases like calling time when the hour is up, discussions about going over time.
It's different from the sex worker's perspective, presumably. Their turning tricks involves managing time rigidly for income.
Right, whereas for the clients, it's positioned more as their leisure time, even though it's strictly time.
And they don't like it when the sex worker seems too focused on the clock, do they? Clock watching.
No, that's generally viewed very negatively. It shatters the illusion, doesn't it? It's a blunt reminder that it is just business.
So in the end, this whole VFM concept seems defined entirely within that framework of commodifying bodies and emotions.
Pretty much. It's the client assessing if they got what they felt was a fair return in services, emotions, experience for the money they spent.
Okay, let's turn to a topic that's inevitably part of this: health, risk, and sex work.
Yeah, and the source is clear that risk here means more than just STIs. It includes the worries about the safety of the location, the risk of being robbed, getting ripped off.
You see that in the reviews, how men assess the venues. They seem to prefer places in, quote, respectable suburban areas, maybe, over places they see as dodgy.
Definitely. Things like good lighting, feeling secure, discretion, those things are valued.
And discretion is key for them personally, too, right? Taking steps to avoid being seen and expecting the sex worker to be discreet as well.
Yes. And alongside that, there's a real fear expressed sometimes about being robbed or threatened. That reviewer, Preston Pete, you mentioned, he actually described being robbed.
Does the source say much about how sex workers protect themselves?
Less detail on that as it's focused on the men's reports, but it acknowledges that workers likely have strategies, alert systems, maybe even carrying protection, that kind of thing.
And how do the men perceive risk from the sex workers themselves?
Well, there's often an association made between perceived drug use and risk, seeing it as linked to being dirty or dangerous.
So cleanliness is a big concern.
Huge concern. Both the cleanliness of the person and the place. Hygiene comes up a lot.
Some reviews even mention washing or bathing as part of the process.
Yes, almost like a ritual to establish cleanliness and safety at the start.
And then, the big one, condoms. Safe sex. How's that discussed?
It varies. Some reviews state clearly that condoms were used for everything. Others mention they weren't used for oral sex, OWO, or BBBJ, or maybe used selectively for different acts.
The source also touches briefly on anal sex and the power dynamics around that, I think.
Yes, briefly. But a really significant takeaway regarding risk is how these punternet accounts, when taken together, seem to create this sort of normative acceptance.
Acceptance of what?
Of unprotected oral sex, specifically. Within that particular online community, it seems to have been viewed as relatively normal or acceptable despite the known health risks.
Which obviously has pretty serious public health implications.
Absolutely. Any unprotected sex carries risks.
Okay, wow. We have certainly covered a lot of ground there, digging into those punternet archives. Let's try and wrap this up with our outro.
Yeah, so looking back across all these field reports, you really see this complex picture emerge, don't you? It's this whole world where commerce and desire and performance and identity are all tangled up together in that online space.
And it's so crucial to remember this is just a snapshot, isn't it? A unique one, yeah, but limited. It's men paying for sex around the year 2000 in the UK. through this specific website.
Exactly. It's not necessarily representative of everything then or now, but it definitely gives us a valuable, if sometimes uncomfortable, window onto that hidden behavior.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Mhm.
Well, considering everything we've discussed, the commodification, the intimacy performance, the focus on VFM, the risks, how might this challenge or maybe expand our understanding?
Hmm.
Our understanding of sex work, sure, but also intimacy more broadly,
Hmm.
and perhaps even how masculinity gets constructed.
That's a great question. It definitely gives you a lot to think about the sheer complexity of these interactions.
Indeed. It's complex, definitely uncomfortable at times, no easy answers. But hopefully this deep dive into Punternet has, I don't know, shed some light on a fascinating, often unexplored corner of human experience. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.